what better way to start a day than with a good morning? A whole bunch of sets of good mornings. That's what I did this morning. I've been feeling really tight in the hamstrings last few days, really sore. So I thought, let's just put some blood into them. I thought about doing hamstring curls on that bench that I have, because the hamstring curls get all of the hamstrings. There's one hamstring that doesn't cross the hip, and so it's not involved in hip extension, bicep femoris. That guy's basically not active when you're doing hip hinging movements, squatting, deadlifting, things of that nature. So really, that guy only gets involved when there's active knee flexion. So I thought about that, but I thought, what's more relevant to what I'm trying to do? The lying leg curl or the actual hip hinging thing, which I need. I'm still kind of thinking about the biceps femoris, if it has any effect in that whole deadlifting, squatting motion, because, it doesn't really sound like it. But I guess as an athlete, you're supposed to address all of them. You don't want something to tear. But for this morning, I decided to go with good mornings. I thought about RDLs. I've had a lot of success. A lot of you guys have pointed that out to me in the comments. Start of the year, I did a whole bunch of 200 kilo RDLs. They were very heavy 5x5s, which ultimately led to what I would say the best squatting that I've had. 190 kilos for 3 sets of 5. That's, to me, the best squatting I've ever done. It was just, I felt powerful, I felt strong, I felt stable through the whole range of motion. So I think that's on the back of doing those, doing all those RDLs. So I thought about doing that, but ultimately I want to keep the weight down. And so in my mind, I thought, well, there's no way in hell I can good morning 200 kilos. It's just a longer lever, no lats involved. Whereas, with the RDL, there's, you can hinge down with your lats. It's a smaller lever because, there's retraction of the bar, you keeping the bar close to your body. Whereas with the good morning, the thing is way ahead of your feet, or at least more so than the RDL. So I opted out for good mornings. And it felt good. It really felt good. I started off really slow. Did a whole bunch of sets. I did 3 sets with the bar, 3 sets with 30 kilos, I think it was. 3 sets with 40 kilos, then I jumped to 60 kilos and did 1 set. And it all felt really good. I kept trying to hold that arch in my back. And that was kind of putting tension through the hamstrings. And it was a really good. I went over to squatting and it felt fluid. It felt really nice. Worked up to 140 with the squats, and that was the session. I was here for about, an hour. Did all those sets. But that's one way to keep the weight down. There's early morning sessions. I don't want to, number one, I don't want to be banging around. I keep saying this to you guys. It might not sound like a thing that I should be thinking about, but one of the variables of these training sessions in the morning is sound. And so I'm carefully picking exercises that are not making sound. So I never deadlift off the floor. At least try not to. It's just too much banging. Even if I had a mat and if I had all these crash mats, all that stuff, there's still clicking of the bar, in the plates. There's, and then lowering the weight, all that. So I didn't want to do that. I thought about doing the rack pulls, like setting up a rack pull and then doing those blocks, standing on blocks in the rack pull. And so I can put towels on the rack, and that will kind of limit the plates kind of bouncing on the bar or whatever, clicking. So that would have been a funny thing. I'm doing a deficit rack pull, work that out. But I opted out with good mornings. And the good thing about good mornings is that you're 100% thinking about hip hinging. There's nothing else happening. You're hip hinging, and all you're trying to do is maintain an arch in your back or maintain some sort of a flat back or integrity of the back. Whereas with RDLs and rack pulls, there is a tendency to kind of maybe round a little bit in the thoracic spine, because you're kind of fixated on where the bar goes. So when you're holding an RDL, when you're holding the bar, you're kind of marking in your mind how far down the shin you're going, and so you want to get to that thing all the time. And so the bar becomes the reference rather than the reference being, exactly where your hip hinging, where the hips are, your lower back, right? It's a pure hip hinge. So I find it a lot easier to just concentrate on the hip hinge with a good morning, then the rack pulls, then the the RDLs. So I did that. And honestly, like right now, I'm thinking to myself, man, these good mornings are, I haven't done them for a little while, but they feel really good. And they're also very fresh in my mind because last night I basically spent a good 2 hours just listening to Louie Simmons speak. It's one of those funny things, man. And I'll never forget when Michael Jackson, when he passed away. I'm not a guy that ever listened to his music. I said to you guys, I grew up on hip hop and rap and all that stuff, Eminem and Dre, all those guys. Like that's kind of, especially being around basketball and basketball kind of being, predominantly a hip hop thing. And so that's kind of how I grew up on. But I always kind of thought Michael Jackson was the shit, right? Like he was probably the worst famous, I don't know, artist, would you say, or singer, I don't know what you'd call him, performer. But I remember when he died, I went into this phase of listening to all of his music. It's just really weird how death works, man. Like, you almost kind of, you always think to yourself, oh man, like, we lost that beautiful artist, or we lost that incredible performer. And then you start to kind of listen to all of the stuff, and that's kind of how I feel about Louie. I listen to Louie all the time, man, like, on and off. I'll kind of binge his stuff. He always made sense to me. Not always, initially he didn't, but recently he's made a lot of sense to me. But ever since he passed away, I've been kind of just smashing his videos, listening to him talk. One of you guys actually shared a story on the comments. You said that there was a clip where these two weightlifters came in and Louie had them do power cleans with bands. And one of the fellas basically PR'd because of that session, because he was kind of getting accustomed to the bands. And then he ended up doing a PR, 5-pound PR, when they took the bands off. I thought it's just one of those things, man, one of those stories that, the man knew what he was talking about, man. You just have to kind of allow his ideas to enter your mind and kind of allow yourself to process some of these ideas. I think that's the thing. And, one of the big things that he spoke about when it comes to squatting and whatever, deadlifting, he was a big proponent of good mornings. If you have a weak back, good mornings, man. And, he talked about setting up pins so you don't get into trouble. So if you go down and you can't get up, like, what the hell do you do, man? Like, you let the bar roll over your head. And so, you do them in the power rack, you set the pins really high, and so you kind of set yourself a safety so you don't snap your spine. He snapped his back. I think he snapped his neck and his lower back with good mornings. So I'm always scared of good mornings, man. I'm always scared of good mornings. And on top of that, I remember Bruce Lee. One of the first stories I remember about him is that he snapped his back pretty bad and he ended up being on crutches or in bed even for like 10 months. I think what he was doing though was he was rounding his back on purpose. Like, he was basically doing a Jefferson curl type thing with a decent amount of weight. Now, Bruce Lee wasn't a powerhouse of a man. He was a lightweight and, he's a freaking martial artist, so there was no need for him to be bulky as hell. But so he was basically trying to train those erectors, like in that rounded over position. This is why I have a lot of fear with Jefferson curls, number one. Much worse than good mornings, but good mornings even as well. I have this fear of them because you're in a very compromised position, very compromised position, and the fact that your lats are out of the game scares me even more because there's less integrity. Like, one of the biggest muscle groups of the upper body has been removed from the movement because the bar is not in your hands, so you can't kind of contract those lats. So ultimately, I think I know Louie talks about 3 to 5 reps, or even I think he even said singles in good mornings. Man, maybe one day I'll work up to that, but man, I think I'll always be afraid of the good mornings. I don't know. Today I tried to have a little bit of a knee bend because if you have complete stiff leg good mornings, it just feels freaking awkward, man. It feels like the bar is way too far beyond your feet. That's at least it feels to me. But anyway, I started slow. I remember last time I did good mornings, I never ever put 60 kilos on. I was really kind of working with basically the bar for like sets of 20. Today it felt good. It felt good. Maybe these rack pulls have kind of made me feel good about them. But but yeah, 60 kilos for a set of 10. And I felt explosive. As long as you maintain the arch in your back, I think you're good. You're good. So you have to pick your I guess your dosages, your weight very, very carefully. Because the strength curve in the good morning, like at the top, you're like, oh, this is like when you're on rack a good morning, you're like, man, this is freaking light, man. Like, because it starts in the same position as a squat. But then as you continue on with the movement and you start going towards the bottom, things change really, really quickly. And that can get you into trouble, because if you go like 2 centimeters further down, all of a sudden the forces are, multiplied, because just through the leverage. And then people get in trouble. So at the top it's easy, but at the bottom it's hell. So just think about that bottom position and let that guide your selection of weight. But today I started really slow. I did 3 sets of bar, 3 sets of 30, 3 sets of 40, and then 1 set of 60. I think that's the way to do it. Don't just have, walk in and slap 60 kilos on it to go into it. Like, I don't think that's a good idea. And then you have to be mindful of that, because you've trained that motion. You have to be mindful of going to squatting and deadlifting after that. So it's kind of like a way of deloading. You guys are telling me, you take a few days as a deload. When I want to deload, I just do this sort of stuff where I don't go straight into a squat or deadlift right away. I pick an accessory movement and I do that. And I kind of get exhausted with an accessory movement, which is less spinal loading, less blah, 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 blah. And you kind of get away with not having so much weight on your back. That's how I deload, and especially these mornings, 5 o'clock in the morning, 4 o'clock in the morning, I'm not in the prime shape. And today especially I'm sore. And so you start with a good morning, and then you further kind of lower that ceiling for squatting and deadlifting, and you're good. So even though you guys think I'm smashing myself every day, it's not like that at all. Like, I don't think you can make damn near 900 days of squatting in a row if you just max efforting every single day. It's not like that, man. I have my moments where I do this sort of stuff, and I work, obviously, and so on those working days I rarely push really hard. Rarely do I do that, because I have to survive 12 hours in ED. And I don't want to get caught up where I'm freaking exhausted, barely walking around the place. So that's where we're at. Thinking about good mornings, thinking about hamstrings. I've read a few of your comments from last night. This is 4 o'clock in the morning, 5 o'clock in the morning, and last night I uploaded that video at 10 o'clock, so I haven't really had a chance to look at many of the comments. But as I was training in between sets today, I was looking at some of your comments, and there seems to be a bit of a debate going on whether hamstrings are a thing or not a thing when it comes to squatting. A few of you guys responded, really well, and talking about the difference between low bar and high bar, and some of you guys brought up Mark Rippetoe's videos on explaining why the squat is actually a thing. I think it's a thing. I honestly think it's a thing. If you don't believe it's actually a prime mover, then I, at least at the bare minimum, I think it's a secondary mover, if you want to call it. I think that thing needs to get long for you to become, that mobility that you need to hit an ATG squat. If you have tight hamstrings, it just doesn't work. I understand that on one side of that femur, you have flexion of the knee and you have extension of the hip, right? So it's kind of like it's net gain of 0 in terms of length of the muscle. I don't know. To me, it's very, very hard to kind of picture all this stuff. One of you guys, talked about it's kind of like the opposite of the rectus femoris. The same thing happens with that muscle. One side gets shorter, the other side gets longer, so the net gain is the same. So these muscles are working isometrically, but that doesn't mean isometrics don't matter. Anyway, it's really hard to explain, but to me, I'm going about my real life experience. And for example, today, my mobility felt a lot better because the hamstrings were warmed up. Now, hamstrings are not working in absolute isolation. They're not. The adductors are very closely related. They also extend the hip when you are more than 90 degrees hip flexion. The glutes are not really in that position to exert a lot of force in that position, so adductors come in. So hamstrings, adductors, they're kind of like buddies with the glutes and the lower back. So it's all kind of things. So when I'm doing good mornings, I feel my hamstrings, but it's not just a hamstring exercise. It's a glute exercise. It's a lower back exercise. Erector, adductor, like it's all happening. So it's really hard to kind of isolate. But the bottom line in my mind is like this. If I was to surgically remove your hamstrings from your body, you have no hamstrings at all, you would have a freaking hard time squatting. That's what I believe. I believe you would go in the hole and you would contract your quads. Your legs would straighten, but your back would be bent over. You would be in a fully hip flex position because you've lost that hip extension. That's what I feel. Because that that hamstring is opposing the rectus femoris. Anyway, it's freaking complex because we're not simple creatures, because these guys are inserting every which way you can imagine. So it's kind of difficult to kind of make sense of it all. Anyway, I'm going to have to get out of here, go to work. But I want to thank Ollie Pasanen. He's the latest name on the Patreon list. It's a bloody joy to see all this, every single day it seems people are coming on and supporting me. It's an absolute joy, and it literally makes my step lighter every time there's another name. Absolutely thankful, appreciate you. It's an awesome thing to see. Anyway, guys, I have to jump out into the shower and go to work. I'll catch you guys in the next one. Peace out.